Jason Statham walks into a luxury Manhattan restaurant dressed like an average guy, and a liberal waitress makes the mistake of her career. What you didn't know? He wasn't just a customer, he was the owner. Watch this jaw-dropping story of arrogance, redemption, and a lesson that's turning heads across the hospitality world. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment if you believe everyone deserves respect, no matter how they look. It was a Thursday evening at Maison Deluxe, a glittering rooftop restaurant in downtown Manhattan perched above the 67th floor, an exclusive realm where the ultra-rich sipped saffron-infused cocktails and chefs treated plates like canvases. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the interior in twilight gold, reflecting off champagne glasses and the pearl-studded dresses of heiresses. Conversations fluttered in a dozen languages, peppered with laughter, stock tips, and talk of art that no one truly understood, but everyone pretended to. The waitstaff were polished to perfection, each of them trained like ambassadors rather than servers. They moved in perfect synchrony, each step rehearsed, each nod calculated. They catered not just to needs, but to egos. Among them was Lena, the latest hire and arguably the most striking waitress Maison had seen in months. She was brilliant, ambitious, fiercely independent, and had recently graduated top of her class in hospitality management from NYU. Lena prided herself on two things: her progressive ideals and her growing TikTok account where she reviewed luxury dining experiences, often with a biting wit and a smug smile. Tonight, however, her attention kept drifting to table 9. Seated alone, sipping from a lowball glass filled with what appeared to be a basic scotch, was a man who looked comically out of place. No tailored jacket, no watch worth the price of car, just a simple, tight-fitting black t-shirt that hugged his arms like it was scared of them, dark jeans and worn boots that had probably seen more airports than she had. He wore no jewelry, no cologne, and no expression beyond the occasional glance out the window toward the skyline. His short stubble and buzz cut only added to the rugged aura. He was muscular, sure, but to Lena, that wasn't enough. What kind of self-respecting man shows up here dressed like he's just walked off a construction site? She muttered to a fellow waitress, Bianca, who just shrugged and walked away. Lena had only been at Maison for 3 weeks, but already she'd made her judgments clear. Old money got respect, new money got a smile, and men who dressed like laborers didn't belong in her section. But what Lena didn't know, and what the rest of the veteran staff did, was that the man at table 9 was Jason Statham. Yes, that Jason Statham. The actor, the former Olympic diver turned action star. A man who could disarm a room without raising his voice or his fist. A man who had once taken down 6 thugs in a parking garage in a movie and made you believe he could do it in real life. And more importantly, a man who, thanks to a quiet investment group, happened to own a majority stake in Maison Deluxe. Not that he flaunted it. That wasn't his style. Jason had a quiet arrangement with the staff, especially the older ones, like Eduardo, the maitre d', and Margot, the senior server. Treat him like anyone else. He came in once a month, not to be served, but to observe. He liked to know how things ran when no one was watching. And tonight he was doing just that. Lena, however, was watching and judging. By the time she walked over to table 9, she had already decided she was going to move him. The table was too valuable to waste on someone who wasn't going to order the $600 seafood tower or post about it online. It was a Thursday night, and the corner booth, with its panoramic view of the Empire State Building, was usually reserved for VIPs. This man, who hadn't even bothered to open the menu, clearly didn't qualify. She approached, chin high, smile thin. "Good evening, sir," she said, voice syrupy but brittle. "I couldn't help but notice you've been lingering here for a while." Jason looked up, his eyes steady and unreadable. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all," Lena replied quickly, though her tone contradicted her words. "It's just that this particular table is typically held for guests who plan to dine. Our reservations are quite exclusive, you see." Jason took a sip of scotch, unfazed. "So I've heard." Lena gave a tight laugh, mistaking his calm for cluelessness. "Right. So if you're just planning to drink, perhaps I can relocate you to the bar. It's got an excellent view of the Hudson." Jason set his glass down. Slowly, with the kind of silence that makes people lean in without realizing it. I like this view just fine. There was a pause, long enough for a passing server to nearly trip watching the interaction. Well, Lena said, I'm afraid the manager may have something to say about that. Our executive clientele has expectations. Does he now? Jason asked, that gravelly British accent finally cutting through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. Yes, and so do we, Lena snapped, then regretted it immediately. She glanced toward Eduardo, who had been quietly watching from the podium. His face betrayed no emotion, but the way his eyes widened slightly told her something was off. Still, Lena pushed forward. Look, sir, Maison Deluxe isn't a dive bar. It's not some underground speakeasy. It's a modern fine dining experience. For people who understand refinement, we've worked hard to cultivate an ambience. Jason tilted his head, clearly amused now. Is that what you think this is about? Ambience? I think, she said, arms crossing slightly, that some people assume they can walk into a place like this, sit wherever they want, and not realize that their presence disrupts the experience for others. And there it was. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Nearby, a couple who had been enjoying their foie gras paused mid-bite. A socialite influencer stopped filming her risotto. Eduardo stiffened at the podium. Margot froze, wine bottle in hand. Jason leaned forward, elbows on the table now. And what kind of presents do you think I bring exactly? Lena faltered just for a second, but her pride was already on the line. Her self-image, her reputation, were tightly tied to her ability to handle situations and uphold standards. She didn't back down. Well, clearly you're not here for the dining experience. You've ordered a single drink. You're dressed in a way that's unconventional. And you're occupying the best table in the house when we've got real VIPs waiting. Real VIPs, Jason repeated, nodding slowly. Got it. Lena, taking his apparent agreement as submission, smiled sweetly. Exactly. So if you wouldn't mind, I do mind. The way he said it made her blink. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. But something in his tone shut her up instantly. I mind, he said again, because I've been sitting at this table once a month for the past 2 years. Ordered the same drink. Worn the same boots. And never once had anyone tell me I didn't belong here. Lena's mouth opened, but no words came out. Jason leaned back again, casually, but the intensity in his eyes hadn't lessened. You see, Lena. She froze. She hadn't introduced herself. Jason pointed subtly toward the lapel pin on her apron, which bore her name. You think ambience is created by fancy outfits and overpriced appetizers. But real ambience? It's created by people. The kind who treat others with dignity, regardless of appearances. Lena's cheeks flushed crimson. But Jason wasn't finished. And the thing is, he glanced at his watch, then toward Eduardo, who nodded discreetly. You're about to find out what happens when you mistake simplicity for insignificance. And with those chilling words, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The tension in the air could have been carved with a butter knife. What happened next would flip Lena's world upside down and make Maison Deluxe the setting of a story that would ripple through the industry like wildfire. But that revelation was just beginning. For a few seconds, it was as if time itself had paused at Maison Deluxe. The clinking of silverware, the hum of conversation, the shuffle of polished shoes against marble, all of it faded beneath the gravity of what had just happened at Table 9. Jason Statham sat motionless, his quiet intensity drawing every nearby glance. Lena, standing across from him, felt the weight of unseen eyes drilling in her back, but she kept her chin up. She had to. She'd gotten this far by believing she was always the smartest person in the room, always in control. But that confidence had begun to fracture. Jason's last words echoed in her head. You're about to find out what happens when you mistake simplicity for insignificance. Still, she pushed forward, clutching to the frayed edges of her pride. I don't mean any disrespect, Lena said, voice thinner now. But you can't seriously expect me to believe you're some kind of regular. Jason smiled. Not the Hollywood smile. Not the fast and furious smirk. This was different. Colder. Sharper. The kind of smile that told 1,000 stories without saying a single word. "I don't expect you to believe anything," he said. "Belief isn't required. Observation is." Before she could respond, a soft chime rang out from the maitre d's stand. Eduardo, the veteran host with 30 years of Michelin star experience and enough composure to handle Middle Eastern royalty without breaking a sweat, picked up the phone. His eyes widened, but only slightly. Then he set it down and nodded once toward Jason. Jason nodded back. "What is this?" Lena asked, now looking between the two men. "What's going on?" "I think you're about to get a front row seat," Jason replied. A moment later, the double doors at the entrance swung open. Not rushed, not chaotic, just deliberate. Smooth. A woman in a sleek charcoal pantsuit strode in, flanked by two associates holding leather portfolios. She looked like someone who spent her days advising billionaires and her nights ignoring them. Power practically radiated off her heels. She walked straight to Jason's table and spoke without hesitation. "Mr. Statham, we've finalized the paperwork. Would you like to sign here or in the back office?" Lena blinked. "Wait, what?" Jason stood now, slowly, like a man with all the time in the world. The sleeves of his t-shirt tightened around his biceps as he moved. He took the pen she offered and, without so much as glancing at the paperwork, scribbled his signature. Then he looked at Lena, who was frozen in place. "You want to know what I was doing here," he said casually. "I'm finalizing the purchase of the penthouse above this restaurant. Thought I'd drop in, check the place out, enjoy the view." Lena felt her stomach drop. "Purchase," she repeated. "The penthouse." Jason nodded. "That's right. And this place." He gestured around the dining room. "I already own part of it. Have for years. But after tonight's little display, I might consider buying a bigger stake." His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't even condescending. It was worse. It was honest. Matter of fact. Delivered with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power he held and had no desire to flex it unnecessarily. The silence in the room cracked like a shell. Bianca, the waitress Lena had dismissed earlier, let out a soft, stunned whistle. The influencer at table 3 looked up from her phone, mouthing, "Is that really him?" One of the chefs poked his head from the kitchen, eyes wide. Lena was trying to breathe, but her chest felt tight. "You own this place?" she asked, her voice trembling now. Jason nodded again, this time slower. "I don't advertise it, because I don't need to. I come here to see how people behave when they think no one's watching." He stepped closer, voice still low but unmissable. "You judged me the moment you saw me. Not based on how I acted, not on what I ordered, but on my boots, my shirt, the way I wasn't trying to impress you." Lena's throat went dry. "You assumed I didn't belong, that I was beneath the room, that I was wasting your time," Jason continued. "And that says more about you than it does about me." She tried to speak, to apologize, but Jason raised a hand slightly, not to silence her, but to pause the moment. "You want to work in hospitality?" he asked. "Then let me give you a little tip." His voice hardened just slightly. "Just enough. Hospitality isn't about serving the people you think matter. It's about treating everyone like they matter." Behind her, Eduardo gave a subtle nod of approval. Margot, still holding the wine bottle she had frozen mid-pour minutes earlier, finally set it down with reverence. Jason looked around the room now, speaking not just to Lena, but to everyone watching. "Some of you recognized me. Some didn't. But that's not the point. Because whether I'm Jason Statham or just some guy off the street, no one deserves to be talked down to. Ever." The room was completely still. Even the elevators, usually pinging in the distance, seemed to wait for him to finish. "And the funny thing is," he added, smirking now, "I was actually planning to invest more in this place tonight. Expand the rooftop, hire new staff, maybe even give some of the servers equity." Lena flinched. "But then I thought," he let the words linger, "maybe I should find out who really deserves to be part of this team." He turned back to Lena. "And right now, I'm not sure that's you." Lena's legs went weak. The marble floor suddenly felt like ice beneath her heels. Her mind spun with flashes of all the times she'd judged customers by their shoes, their watches, their ability to pronounce burrata. And now, here she was, dressed to perfection, standing in front of the one man who could determine her entire future in the industry. and she tried to move him. Embarrassed, didn't even begin to cover it. I didn't know, she whispered finally. I just thought that I was a nobody. Jason finished. She nodded, ashamed. He studied her for a moment, then looked over her shoulder. Eduardo. The maitre d' stepped forward instantly. Yes, sir. I'd like to make a change to the floor plan, Jason said. Effective immediately. Yes, sir. Of course. Jason turned back to Lena, but his expression had softened now. Just slightly. I'm not here to ruin your career, he said. But I won't pretend this didn't happen either. She swallowed. I understand. You sure, he asked. Because in my world, second chances are rare. But when they come, they don't come easy. You'll have to earn it. Lena nodded slowly. I will. I swear I will. Jason stared at her a beat longer, then gave a short nod. Good. He turned and began walking toward the back of the restaurant, but paused just before the kitchen. And then, without turning around, he spoke one last time. You never know who you're talking to, so talk to everyone like there's somebody. And with that, he disappeared behind the doors, leaving Lena to face a restaurant full of silent witnesses, stunned servers, and one very hard truth. She hadn't just insulted a man. She had insulted an entire principle. The echo of the kitchen doors swinging closed behind Jason Statham reverberated louder than the clamor of silverware, the buzz of conversation, or the soft jazz wafting through the ceiling speakers. For a moment, Maison Deluxe was frozen in stunned silence. Frozen in a reality too surreal for the luxury restaurant's curated ambience. Lena stood alone at table 9. Every molecule of pride, every ounce of control, every arrogant thought she'd clung to like armor, all of it had disintegrated in a matter of minutes. Her feet, still planted in $500 designer heels, suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone fake. Someone lost. Her order pad trembled in her hand. A quiet cough broke the stillness. Eduardo approached, his gait slow, deliberate. His eyes were kind, but grave. You all right? He asked gently. Lena opened her mouth, but no words came. Her voice was somewhere behind the knot in her throat. She just nodded. Eduardo didn't press. He simply gestured to the kitchen. You should go back there, he said. He's not angry, but he's thoughtful. When he gives you a moment, you'd better take it. I don't know what to say, Lena whispered. Eduardo gave a faint smile. Then maybe it's time you learn to listen instead. He walked off before she could respond. Lena stood there for another 10 seconds before her legs finally started moving. Her walk toward the kitchen felt like a funeral procession. Each step heavy, her pride peeling off layer by layer. She could feel the eyes on her, some judging, some pitying, others watching with morbid curiosity. She passed Bianca, who gave her a small, sympathetic nod. Margot, stoic as ever, looked up briefly from polishing glasses and said nothing. But her silence was louder than any scolding. As Lena pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, she felt like she was stepping into another world. The back of house was a flurry of motion. Chefs barking in French, steam rising in waves, pans clattering like distant thunder. But in the far corner, by the service station, Jason Statham stood alone, arms crossed, not angry, not impatient, just waiting. She walked toward him slowly, the smell of truffle oil and caramelized onions mixing with the bitter taste of her own regret. She began, but he raised a hand, softly but firmly. Let me ask you something, he said, not looking at her yet. Why are you here? Lena blinked. What? This job, he said. This place. Why are you here? She hesitated, then gave the answer she'd rehearsed 100 times during interviews. Because I love fine dining. The art. The detail. No, he interrupted. Not the script. The truth. She paused, looked down at her shoes. Then, finally, quietly, she said, I wanted to be somewhere that mattered. Somewhere people noticed me. Somewhere I could feel important. Jason nodded, still not judging. Just absorbing. And how's that working out? He asked. Her throat clenched. Not great, she admitted. Jason finally looked at her. You want to know the first place I ever worked? He asked. She didn't respond. Just waited. Back room of a London market. Selling perfume knockoffs to tourists. I wore a hoodie, and the boss had me stand in the cold all day just to shout best cologne in Soho. at every stranger who passed by. He smirked. You think that was glamorous? Lena managed a small shake of the head. It wasn't, but I learned more about people on that street corner than I ever did in any hotel or on any set. You know what I learned? She shook her head again. People want two things, Jason said. To be seen and to be respected. Lena swallowed. Look, I've been judged my whole life, he continued. Told I'd never make it because I didn't come from the right family, didn't go to the right schools. Hell, I started doing my own stunts because nobody thought I could act. I had to fight for every inch I got in this industry. He stepped closer now, eyes locked on hers. So when someone like me walks into a place like this, dressed the way I want, drinking what I like, and gets told I don't belong, I don't get angry. I get disappointed. Lena winced. That word hurt more than any insult. I see a lot of myself in people who work their way up, he said, but I also see something dangerous in people who think class means putting others beneath them. That's not class. That's cowardice hiding behind couture. She said nothing. She couldn't. But I'll give you credit, Jason added. You didn't run. She looked up, confused. Most people would have bolted, quit on the spot, blamed the system, blamed the customer. You're still here. And that means something. He looked over to a small side station, where a young kitchen runner was slicing radishes with the focus of a neurosurgeon. That kid over there, Jason said, gesturing. He's 17, works nights, goes to high school during the day, never complains, never judges. He'll be managing restaurants in 5 years if someone gives him a shot. He turned back to Lena. So now I'm asking you, do you want a shot? She blinked. A shot. To learn. To unlearn. To rebuild, he said. From the ground up. Lena's lip trembled. I do. God, I really do. Jason nodded. Good. Because I'm not just an investor here. I'm starting something bigger. A hospitality program. Real training. Real mentorship. And I want you in it. Her heart stopped. You do? Yes, he said simply. But there's a condition. Anything, she said quickly. You're not going to be serving the corner booth, Jason said. Not for a while. You're going to spend a month in the back of house. Prepping plates. Sweeping floors. Watching what it really takes to build a 5-star experience. She nodded. She didn't care. She would have washed dishes for a year if it meant a second chance. And when that month's up, he continued, you'll come back out front. Not as a waitress. Her eyes widened. But as a host. She gasped. But You'll be the first face people see, Jason said. And by then, you'll know how to treat every single one of them, whether they're in a $1,000 suit or a $10 t-shirt. Lena's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Jason gave a single, firm nod. Make it count. And with that, he turned and disappeared again into the heart of the kitchen, leaving Lena standing there, shaken, humbled, but somehow stronger. For the first time since stepping into Maison de Luxe, she wasn't pretending to be someone. She was someone willing to learn, someone finally beginning to understand what real respect, real class, and real hospitality meant. But she had a long road ahead of her, and it started right now. The next morning, Lena arrived at Maison de Luxe 2 hours earlier than her usual shift. There was no makeup, no high heels, no curated aura of superiority. Just her hair tied back in a low ponytail, black slacks, a plain shirt, and sneakers she hadn't worn since her college internships. She felt invisible. She also felt, for the first time in a long time, honest. Eduardo met her by the service entrance. He looked her over, and for the first time, smiled. Not the professional smile he gave to celebrities, but a real, earned one. You showed up, he said simply. I said I would, she replied. That's good, he nodded. But saying and doing are different currencies here. Come on, time to earn. The next 4 weeks would humble Lena in ways she never imagined. She was no longer the glamorous server gliding through the dining room with a menu in one hand and a judgment in the other. She was now shoulder to shoulder with dishwashers and prep cooks. Her world shrank to stainless steel counters, produce crates, and the rhythmic clang of sauté pans being tossed with speed and precision. Her first station, prep. She spent 12-hour shifts peeling potatoes until her fingers blistered, dicing onions until her eyes swelled shut, and learning how to julienne carrots with the speed of a Tokyo sushi chef. Her Her supervisor was a Honduran line cook named Carlos who spoke only basic English, but communicated fluently through nods, taps on the cutting board, and one key phrase. Again, better. Lena had never worked so hard in her life. No tips, no compliments, no designer shoes, just work. And in that work, something strange began to happen. She began to change. She started learning the names of the people she'd never spoken to. She learned that Miguel, the dishwasher, was sending money home every month to support his mother's cancer treatments in Puebla. That Anya, the sous chef, was a former surgeon in Ukraine who'd fled the war and now rebuilt her life, one filet mignon at a time. She realized that for all her talk about inclusivity and equity, she'd spent her early career judging people by the same metrics she claimed to reject: social media followers, fashion sense, their proximity to wealth. And now she was elbow deep in garlic cloves, scrubbing cutting boards, and listening to stories that had nothing to do with hedge funds or handbags, but everything to do with human dignity. By the end of week 2, she was sweating through 2 uniforms a day. By the end of week 3, she could break down a whole chicken in under 2 minutes, blindfolded. By the end of week 4, she'd earned something no Instagram post could give her: respect. Not just from others, from herself. Then came the moment that shifted everything again. On the final day of her back-of-house training, Jason Statham returned. Not through the front door, not to a fanfare, but through the service corridor like any other employee. He wore the same black t-shirt, the same boots, the same calm demeanor that had shaken her life a month earlier. He walked into the prep area, surveyed the chaos, then saw her, tied apron, flour on her cheeks, hair tucked under a kitchen cap, chopping herbs like a woman possessed. He walked over. She noticed him just as she was wiping her hands on a towel. "Didn't think I'd see you still here," he said. Lena gave a shy smile. "Didn't think I'd want to be." Jason chuckled. "Heard you've been earning your stripes." "I'm still learning," she said. "Every minute." "Good," he replied. "That's the only kind of person worth training." He pulled a folded card from his back pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "Your new schedule," he said. "Starting Monday, you're moving out front." Her heart jumped. "I am. As host," he confirmed. "But it's not just about smiling at guests and handing out menus. You'll be the compass, the first face, the first tone. You'll set the rhythm for the entire night." She swallowed hard. "And just so you know," Jason added, "I've assigned you a mentor." "Ooh." He pointed across the kitchen. Anya, the Ukrainian sous chef, had just finished plating a risotto. She gave Lena a sly wink. "She's going to teach you about grace," Jason said. "Grace under pressure. Grace under judgment. Grace when no one's looking." Lena nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes." "I know you will," Jason said. "You're not the same person who tried to throw me out a month ago." "I hope not," she whispered. Jason gave her a look that hovered between approval and challenge. "You're not, but you'll have to prove that. Every day." Lena didn't flinch. "Then I will." That weekend, Lena spent every spare hour studying guest seating plans, learning the preferences of repeat diners, understanding the subtle differences in etiquette between an old money banker and a high-fashion PR executive. But more than anything, she practiced how to make anyone feel seen. No matter who walked through the door on Monday, she would look them in the eye, offer a sincere welcome, and guide them like they mattered, because they did. Monday came faster than she expected. She stood at the host stand in a sleek black dress. Modest, elegant, confident not in its brand, but in the woman wearing it. Eduardo stood beside her, beaming like a proud father. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. More than ever. The doors opened. A tourist in jeans and a windbreaker was first to arrive. No reservation. A little lost. Clearly not a regular. Lena smiled warmly. "Welcome to Maison Deluxe," she said. "My name is Lena, and I'm so glad you're here." He blinked, surprised by the kindness. "Really?" "Of course," she said. "Follow me. You're in for something special." As she led him to his table, the staff watched her with silent approval. Margot nodded. Miguel smiled. Bianca whispered to another server, "Told you she had it in her." But none of them saw what happened at the back of the dining room. Jason Statham sat alone at table 9, sipping his usual scotch, watching, smiling. Not because she got it perfect, but because she got it right. 2 months had passed since Lena's first shift as the host of Maison Deluxe. In that time, the restaurant had changed. Not in its decor, not in its menu, not in its glittering clientele or elite rooftop views. No, the change was more subtle, woven into the feel of the place. The energy, the air. Guests began to notice. The vibe was warmer. The staff moved with more cohesion. Service felt less like a performance and more like a welcome home. High-profile food critics, the kind who never used to write about vibe, suddenly started describing Maison as having heart. But the biggest change? It stood every night at the host stand. Lena, she had become more than a front-of-house coordinator, more than a name tag. She was now the conductor of the Maison Deluxe Symphony. She remembered not just reservations, but preferences. Not just names, but stories. She greeted billionaires and busboys with the same warmth, the same grounded respect that Jason had once shown her in the back of that kitchen. She no longer cared who wore what, who ordered what. She didn't skin watches or handbags for status. She listened. She noticed. She served. And every Friday night, without fail, she reserved table 9. For Jason, he never made a reservation. He never needed to. Lena simply knew it was on one of those Fridays, near closing time, that something different happened. Jason finished his usual scotch and stood to leave, but instead of slipping quietly toward the service corridor, he walked up to the host stand, where Lena was carefully finishing her notes for the weekend floor plan. He waited until she noticed him. She looked up and smiled instinctively. "Mr. Statham," she said softly. "How was everything tonight?" Jason smirked. "Still calling me that?" She chuckled. "Feels wrong to say Jason while you're dressed like a guy who could punch through a door." He laughed, just once, and nodded toward the maitre d's podium. "You've made this your command post," he said. "I guess I have," she replied. "It's strange. I used to think this job was beneath me, and now I feel like it's the most important thing I've ever done." "It is," Jason said, "because you set the tone. You're the first test. You decide whether this place lives up to what it says it is, or crumbles under its own ego." Lena glanced down, quietly absorbing the weight of his words. "I try to remember what you said, about treating everyone like they matter." Jason nodded. "You've done more than remember it. You've embodied it." She looked up, humbled. "I only got here because you gave me a second chance." "No," he said. "You got here because you took it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. Handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it after I leave," he said. "I don't want to stick around for the waterworks." She narrowed her eyes. "Is this another test?" He smirked. "Call it a promotion. Of sorts." Before she could ask more, he was gone. Just like always, quiet, unassuming, the storm that never needed to roar. Lena waited until the last guest left, until the candles were snuffed out, until the staff began sweeping the marble floors. Then, alone at the host stand, she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Handwritten, heavy paper, simple ink. "Lena, you started this job thinking prestige came from exclusivity. You now understand it comes from inclusivity. You thought class was about clothing. You now know it's about character. You judged a man for his appearance, but then rebuilt yourself from the ground up. That takes courage. I've been working with a group to open a new restaurant downtown. A different kind of place. One that fuses fine dining with something more important, dignity. It will be called Table 9, and I want you to be its general manager. Don't think of this as a reward. Think of it as a challenge. One you've proven you're ready for. You won't be alone. Miguel's joining you as lead server. Anya's consulting on the kitchen. Carlos will be your prep lead. Build something beautiful. Make it worthy. Make it human. Make every guest feel like Jason Statham is sitting in front of them. Congratulations, Lena. You earned this. Jay." She stared at the letter for a long time, her fingers trembling just slightly. She read it again and again, until her eyes were full of tears and her chest felt like it might burst from the pressure of gratitude. She folded it carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and looked around the empty dining room. This was the end of one story, but it was only the beginning of another. 6 months later, Table 9 opened in a quiet corner of Soho. It didn't scream luxury. It whispered sincerity. The menu was refined but unpretentious. The lighting was warm, the chairs comfortable, the The staff diverse and fiercely proud. They serve bankers and janitors, actors and Uber drivers, all at the same level of dignity. And every now and then, without any announcement or reservation, Jason Statham would walk in, dressed the same, calm as ever. He never ordered anything extravagant, just a scotch, maybe a steak, and he always asked for whatever table was open, not table 9. Because in this place, every table was table 9. And at the front of the house, standing tall, confident, and utterly changed was Lena. No longer the woman obsessed with appearances. No longer the girl who judged to protect her ego. Now, she was the face of a story whispered across the city. The girl who once tried to move Jason Statham from his table, and who ended up learning more from that mistake than any school could ever teach her. A story they now told at hospitality schools. A story Miguel wrote about in a magazine. A story people repeated at dinner parties like urban legend. And if you ever walk into table 9 and see a young woman at the host stand who greets you like you matter, whether you're wearing a Rolex or a raincoat, it's because she learned the hardest way that you never, ever judge a book by its cover. Especially when that book has fists like Jason Statham's.